Now, working as I do in television in Australia, I'm very partial to great, moving, thought-provoking videos, particularly where horses are concerned, as we've already seen with the fabulous one from ROR. So in preparing for the role of moderator here this afternoon, one of the bits of research into one of our speakers that I most enjoyed was the work of our next speaker, Jock Hutchison, and the video that goes with it. Jock, the founder of Horseback UK. Of course, we know Thoroughbreds are renowned for their uncanny ability at assisting people who've suffered traumas, whether it be post-traumatic stress disorder, which Jock obviously sees a lot of in the people that he does assist through Horseback UK. As a commando with the Royal Marines, Jock saw firsthand some of the difficulties faced by some soldiers returning from war into the general community. And he's combined that with his equestrian skills, and in the past 11 years assisted over 1,300 people gain confidence and also horse skills through that program using thoroughbreds, often sourced from ROR. So a very inspirational speaker. Please make welcome to discuss equine assisted therapy from Scotland, Jock Hutchison.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. At least I think it's good afternoon. I'll just say good day to be on the safe side. I'm still in some other time zone. I'm very proud to be here. I'd like to thank Diana and Di for inviting me to be one of the speakers here amongst such prestigious company. I am going to talk a little bit about the thoroughbred's ability to impress me. The thoroughbred has a stigma attached to him. He is a horse which is bred to race, and as such, those who don't know the horse will argue that he's not suitable for any other task. I would remind everybody here that the horse is like the human. He is what he's taught to be. And race horses, thoroughbreds, are amongst the most intelligent and amongst the most sensitive of horses that we work with. And we'd like you to bear that in mind. I want to talk a little bit about the work we do, not much. I want to focus on one horse in particular, the horse in the picture. He's called Peopleton Brook. He was given to me by ROR, and he taught me as much as anybody's ever taught me about horses and their ability to help other people. A little bit of my background. I was a military officer for 10 years. I was privileged to be a leader. I led some of the finest soldiers in the world. I was also for 5 years a helicopter pilot. And again, I was able to work with some extremely talented people. But the truth of it was, whatever job I did, I was only part of a team. Admittedly, I was a leader of the team, but I was taught right from day one that the leader's job is no more important than anybody else's job. Horsemanship is leadership. It's leadership in its purest form. And all throughout my life, I've sought out horses. It's the one constant in my life. I've loved horses since I was a little kid. The horse in the picture was a Bright Bay Thoroughbred that I owned when I was serving in the Marines as a pilot. Her name was Narcotic, and maybe the name should have been a little bit of a warning, but again, she taught me a great deal, and she'd been through trauma herself. Horses. 12 years ago, my wife and I, we founded a charity called Horseback UK. It was founded because I was made aware as an ex-Marine, for every individual being killed in Afghanistan, 10 were returning home with what they call life-changing injuries, many of them amputees. We had horses, we had a farm, and I wanted to do something for these young men. And what we decided to do was to teach them horsemanship and to give them what we called mobility with dignity. There was a lot of double, or what we call bilateral amputees, guys with no legs. And the type of riding that we practice at Horseback UK is Western, so they were able to sit on a horse and they were able to get away from the rest of us and enjoy the great outdoors. A friend of mine, Colour Sergeant Baz Barrett, most decorated Royal Marine to come back from Afghanistan and one of the most severely injured, spent a week with me, and his daughters came to see him. And something I hadn't thought about at all, Baz had spent his entire recovery, 3.5 years, 57 operations, in a wheelchair. And for the first time in 3 years, his daughters looked up to him, and that made a huge difference to him. He was now in control of a situation as opposed to being a victim or a patient, and his daughters saw him as that, and that made a huge difference to him and the way that we thought about the charity. What we learned from working with people like Baz Barrett and others was the fact it wasn't the riding that really was the powerful element. The fact is that many people who become hurt, whether it's mentally or physically, become isolated due to their illness. The people that I served in the Marines, they have to leave that community. And when they leave it, even if you're 100% healthy, it's quite difficult to re-establish yourself in the civilian world. So if you're carrying an injury and you didn't expect to leave the job you loved, it can be particularly difficult. After clinical care, many of the people that we served didn't know what to do with the rest of their lives. And I would argue strongly that recovery is not just a clinical process, it's about helping somebody get back to a point so where they can contribute and participate in life. We as a society should not use the word disabled. It focuses on what people cannot do. And the truth of it is we're all disabled in some way. The older I get, the more disabled I get. And the more times I hit the earth, the more disabled I get. I work with people who would be described as disabled. And they can contribute enormously to our society, our world, and to other people. But they've got to be given a chance. I'd like to tell you a little story. The guy on the left is a guy called Jay Hare. He's a Royal Marine Commander. He was a corporal. He was in charge of 8 men. He did 3 tours of Afghanistan. He was blown up twice. We call him lucky. The horse on the right is called Peopleton Brook, and he's the horse that I mentioned in the original picture. And Brook ran 93 times. He won, I think, 11 times, was placed as many as 15. He wasn't a superstar racehorse, but what he was a hard-working, talented sprinter. All he had to do in life was run as fast as he possibly could for about half a mile with a particularly small person on him. He was good at his job, but he was hurt, the horse that is, and when he left racing, there was concern from the owners about what he could do next, because he was a bit of a handful. My friend Jay, on the second time he was blown up, he had his right leg blown off, digits to his hand, his face degloved, his nose, his eyes, he lost his right eye. And again, he had to make a lengthy journey of recovery. He did not expect to have to look for another job. Like the horse, Jay, the Royal Marine, was kind of written off by the world, labeled disabled, thought that only he could do the one job, and that it would be difficult for him to find a future and a purpose. I would argue strongly that both the horse and the man and the rest of us need 2 things in life. We need purpose and we need community. If we have those 2 things, we shall find happiness. And those of us that have been lucky to be part of teams, if we find ourselves isolated, it can be particularly difficult. Brooke came to me 3 years ago, and I was very interested in the last talk because we had to help the horse transition from one way of thinking to another way of thinking. And much to my surprise, he took to it like a duck to water. We put him into the herd. He adapted fairly quickly to the idea that he could run with another 30 horses, and they did a lot of the work for me. He learned a little bit of respect for other horses. My lead horse is a guy called Nimitz, and he rebriefed the racehorse fairly quickly. He understood that he was not top of the pecking order, and he had to coy-toy a little bit. However, very quickly, it became apparent to me that the Thoroughbred sensitivity made him particularly suitable for the kind of work that we do at Horseback. Jay, similarly, learned very quickly that what he really wanted to do was to help people, because his journey took 3 years before he got back to a point where he could be fit. He had to leave the Marines, and he now works as head of operations for Horseback. So both the horse and the man found purpose and community beyond their previous careers, and that purpose was helping others. The charity, I'm going to go back one actually because I've missed out a couple of things. One of the processes that we do, when we work with people who are coming, they spend 3 weeks with us. They spend a week at a time, is residential. And we teach leadership through horsemanship. We don't teach people to ride. There's plenty of places you can go and do that. It's not about that. It's about the reconnection. And this connection that we have with horses, and those of us who love horses have felt this since we first met our first horse, is something extraordinarily powerful. And there's now a great deal of medical evidence to back up what we've all known as horse lovers since we were knee-high to grasshoppers. There is medical evidence that there's part of your frontal cortex that becomes very active when you socialize, and that part of your brain becomes active when you're with horses. There is a lot of medical research, and equine therapy, equine-assisted learning is becoming, it's a booming industry in the UK, and I believe in the United States as well. This reconnection is particularly potent if somebody has gone through a mental illness. And our attitude in the UK has changed enormously towards mental health. As a Marine, I was part of a process which assessed mental health in the Royal Marines and the Royal Navy, because so many individuals were coming home from Afghanistan with post-traumatic stress. And really, at the beginning of the process, it wasn't sidelined, but it wasn't understood. We introduced something called TRIM, trauma recognition in the military. It helps us as a team recognize that somebody else is hurting. And by a change of culture and a change of language, we call it brave to admit that you need help. We help people engage with the process so they can treat and manage this particularly difficult condition. The horses are ideal for this, because the horse is by nature an anxious critter. And by teaching somebody to help take away the horse's angst, they learn about their own anxiety and how to manage it. It's a very powerful process, and a very emotive and emotional process for the individuals that come. One of the things I hope we do, we've extended what we do, the charity. We now help kids that are disengaged with the educational process, and this provides purpose for the Marines and the horses. And again, it's not something you learn or talk, it's something that you see and feel. And as such, you gain wisdom from it, not just knowledge. We work with racing welfare, which helps people that have been hurt in the racing industry. And much to my shock, they have enjoyed the process very much, because they have time to go back to the fundamental basic that drew them to the horse racing industry in the first place. They love horses. And by giving them time to become leaders in the type of work that we do, they get to re-engage with that process. So, the charity would and will use more thoroughbreds because of their adaptability, because of their sensitivity. They are perfect. You could not use a horse for the type of work we do that wasn't sensitive. You know, an old cob, but my first horse was called Donut, and quite honestly, you would need some sort of small explosive to get him to go from walk to trot. Good, safe horse, but absolutely no use for the kind of work that we do. We need a horse that you're going to be able to become a leader of and interact with. The thoroughbred is the ideal candidate. So to finish off, because we're nearly at coffee break time, and if, like me, you probably need one, I'm going to tell you a little story about my friend Nick Watt, and Brooke, and how they came together. Now, we have a saying in the Marines that we don't do can't. And when I met my friend Nick, he had broken his neck at age 19. He'd spent 2.5 years going through recovery. He was paraplegic from the neck down. And we have a saying in the UK, he'd given up the ghost. His father was a friend of mine. He asked me to go and see the fella. And I, having no idea what to do, invited him up to meet the horses. The relationship that he developed with Brooke is, I'm going to show you a little video in a minute, is very powerful. And it changed Nick's life completely. He, at the moment, is going through a series of operations to try to reconnect the two vertebrae that were broken during his accident. And, you know, if he's lucky, he'll get to a point where he can get some movement back in his upper body. But if you ask him how or why that's happened, how he's got the opportunity, he would say the engagement with the horse and becoming a leader again when everybody else treated him as disabled was a very big part of that process of him wanting to continue with life. So to finish, I'm going to ask you to show a little video. Can we put the video on, folks? And I'll just talk you through it. The music to it is atrocious. And here you see me illustrating that Brooke is not just a trick pony. He's not going to go through an obstacle unless he wants to. And if you treat him wrong and don't use good leadership, then you're not going to be able to do it. When we first started working with Nick, I used an older horse because I had no idea what we were doing or if this was going to work. And this is one of our old horses, Ellie Mae. She's the sweetest person you'll ever meet. And we worked out how Nick was going to use voice commands to control the horse. And then we put him back with the racehorse. And to my amazement, the racehorse sensitivity meant that he latched onto Nick, and the two of them bonded. And as you can see from the video, Nick is controlling, essentially, the Ferrari off the horse world by voice control. And voice control only because he's got no real movement in his hands at all. They go through obstacle courses, and they do things that able-bodied people couldn't do with a horse. And this, for Nick, is the crux of it. The challenge was that Brooke was a racehorse. And most people, Nick, although he's been hurt, he still wants to take on challenges. We must change our attitude towards people that have been hurt the way that Nick has. So as you can see from the video, the bond was extremely strong. And to finish up, I'd like to leave you with a thought. We've talked a great deal today about what we can do for the racehorses. maybe we should think a little bit also about what thoroughbreds could do for us, because in my experience, they can change lives. Thank you very much for listening to me.